You're listening to the Simply Strategic Ministry podcast hosted by Patrick Weichel. Our goal is to help you grow your ministry through simple strategies and scalable systems. With over a decade of ministry experience, we know that these strategies and systems will bring value to you as a leader and to your entire team.
All right. Well, welcome to the Simply Strategic Ministry podcast. We help you grow your ministry through simple strategies and scalable systems. I cannot wait to interview today Stephen Webb. I know that a lot of people in our community have seen where we share and interact with so much of the content he's put out. And man, I'm so excited to have you. Thank you so much for being on today, dude.
No, thank you, man. Hang on. Let me just stop right there and be like, hey, your promo, your intro right there is amazing. I need to come up with that. It's like, you know what you do. You're good, man. So I'm glad to be here.
I appreciate that, man. So, like I said, our community has shared so much, and I just want to publicly thank you, because I was sharing with him right before this podcast, just like how paradigm shifting some of the thinking is that he puts out, and that is so helpful for so many of us who are trained in the same kind of schools of thought and have grown up in the same ministry. Especially a lot of our people are youth pastors who want to be campus pastors or senior pastors or church planners. Like, there's a few voices, and you've just broken through the noise. And not many people get to do that. Especially not many people who are, especially in the consulting chair that you're in. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah. Seriously, you've helped me a ton. You've helped my family a ton. And cool. I'm just so grateful. But man, I appreciate with that being said, so tell us just, everybody knows that you have been a part of Elevation, and now you're in a consulting role. And, but like I said, you've changed paradox thinking for me. What I want to get to the bottom of is when did that really start for you? When did you start thinking differently? I mean, you talk about being like a coach for your brain, elevating your thinking. When did you start? When did that happen?
Yeah, that's a fun question. Appreciate all the kind words. It's actually what I want to do. So I'm glad you mentioned that. My goal is not to convert anyway to my way of thinking. I just actually want them to do some sort of thinking. I hate it when people start their sentences, well, if Carrie said, or Tim says, or Rick Warren says, or Rochelle says, or Ferdig says, that's great. Those are all good dudes. But I'm just saying, at what point are you going to say? So I just appreciate, that I'm going to say that one person. I'm going to say that Landon is listening. At least there's one person out there that values my content. I appreciate that. That's all I need. That's all I need. I don't need droves of people. I just need one person. So, okay. So that being said, I can't go to some one point in history that says, hey, at this moment, there was a burning bush and God said, start thinking differently. For me, I've always kind of been the heretic. Now, by the way, heretic is not anti-biblical. Heretic just means thinking against what is the common, assumption of everybody, the mainstream. Mm-hmm. So I brag about, I'm totally happy to be a heretic in so many circles, including I'm a season ticket holder for the Dallas Cowboys. And I'm also equal opportunity hater of the Dallas Cowboys, meaning I'm the heretic, bro. I don't have to wear the jersey and say, this is our year. No, man, I'm an equal opportunity heretic. So I've just always been that guy, not because, frankly, just this might shock some people on here, but I'm not cynical. I'm skeptical. I'm logical. I'm a realist. And I also am very eager to be a part of the solution for whatever I'm ranting about. Those are all key elements to what I do and how I think. Most people just want to rant and leave. Most people want to be cynical and then use it as an excuse their entire life. So no, I'm not that. So that's just kind of always been my makeup. I was always the kid, the teenager, obviously now the adult most of the time that just has always asked, why do we do that? Why do you think that? Why do you think that works? Does it work? Because you're just doing it, but you haven't ever asked that question, does it work? So I've just kind of always been that way. And it'll create some frustration with an elementary teacher, high school teacher at some point, but over time you build some curiosity, you blink your eyes, you look back, you're 44 years old, and you're like, oh, that panned out. I'm going to live the rest of my life thinking intentionally now. So it's kind of a rhythm.
Yeah. I love that. I have, I'll ask you if you've seen it, but, in Oppenheimer, they're talking about, he says something about how when they speak, he hears himself. When you speak, he hears a prophet. And I was like, I haven't been able to get that quote out of my head, because so many of us just surround ourselves with guys that we just want to hear ourselves. We like to just speak out loud. And,
that's right.
And you've been that kind of prophetic voice into the church culture right now. And I guess, my question is, because, all of us, especially all of us is probably a wrong term, but many of us, especially guys who are very driven, guys who are very, high, 3, A on the APES model. Like we're very like want to go after it, tell you you're wrong, basically.
Yeah.
My question is, did you ever have a moment where like what was the progression? Like, were you always kind of like this, or did you start like this and kind of temper out and then refine your voice? Like, where did that come? Because for me, it was very, I started like, balls to the wall, let's charge the hill. I'm going to, and then I got in ministry and got settled down a little bit, and I feel like I'm starting to find it again. And tell me about your journey with that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, of course, I hit, sort of walls, if you will, different places or different seasons where you're like, oh, I guess I have to fall in line. And that's fine. I feel like that's everybody. I don't care what your personality profile is, your Enneagram number, whatever. It's always, I feel like you're always going to do that. And then the wise people decide to get in line for a season, not abdicate complete control of their life or their thinking, but the wise people will say, oh, okay, I see that. You're right. That's sideways energy. I probably should stop thinking that way or doing that way or saying that thing. So I've had that before, but ultimately I have a really good memory. I was just telling this to a guy yesterday, and this sounds really silly. It seems so intuitive that you should just use your memory, but people don't. But I have a really good memory, and I'm able to look back and be like, yeah, but God did this. Yeah, but this worked last time. Yeah, but I mean, this is where I saw God show himself in this way. And I find it's fascinating how many people don't do that. So for me, I've gone through a season or two, like let's say, like even an elevation. And I'd love to provide clarity on this. Elevation gets a bad rap, just as every big church does, and they're made fun of 1,000 different ways. And I'm equal opportunity hater on certain things, not necessarily an individual, but just certain things that happen in any place. So I like to point that out, like, hey, let's stop thinking this way. But however, it's a professional organization, a large organization. I'm talking about elevation because I work there. That's my example is what I'm saying. I'm not saying this is true for them, for everybody, or any other church for that matter. I'm just saying my example was I'm working at a big, large, just incredibly, insanely historical, actually fast-paced organization that did things that were uncommon that other people hadn't done. So in that organization, you're working with a high-intensity leader in Stephen Webb that I had really close proximity to. And so there were things that they're like, hey, they, meaning just the culture as a whole, I'll just say it wasn't Pastor Stephen, it wasn't one person, but just generally you're in this culture, you're like, oh, hey, we like your skill, your talent. We need you to kind of fall in line, so to speak, with maybe this is how we say it, or this is how we do it, this is how we do meetings or whatever. And I think everybody needs to go through that. But for me, I took that from like this, and it was like, and it's 180 degrees for me because I didn't start working there until I was 30. See, if you go there and it's your first job, as most of the guys there are, that was their first job, they don't know any different. And that's why a lot of people at big organizations or fast-paced organizations, banks, baseball teams, everywhere in any industry, that's why they just abdicate all thinking and give up, because that is basically where they came of age. Well, I was already a grown-up with some sort of history and rhythm of thinking, of pushing back, of saying things the wrong way, and then I get there at this elevation and they go, no, we don't do that here. So that actually was a punch in the face to me. However, I have a good memory. I know what God's called me to do and how he's built me. And I also have a unique confidence, not cockiness not arrogance, but I'm fine to lean past the line of cockiness. But, and I knew that I still had to come back to some sort of center, if you will. So during that season, to answer your question, I know it's a long story, but during that season, I hate that word because it's a little bit too, people excuse it. But during that, maybe let's say 3 or 4 years, I went from having answers and feeling confident to like, I must not know anything. Nobody told me that. I just felt that way. So I would be in meetings being very, very quiet. Like, well, last time I said this, they wanted to rant and whine about this. So I tell you what, I just won't talk at all. And so I did go through some of that. But, again, on the back end, you start to get some wins under your belt in meetings. You start to open a campus or hire a staff member that everybody didn't like. But now all of a sudden, everyone wants to be like. There's a few of those over there. And I was like, okay, because now I have a good memory, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm just now I found my lane. But I think correction is just part of the game. I think you're supposed to be corrected. And frankly, some things it's not right or wrong. Sometimes it's does it fit or not fit in the organization or the leader you're with. And to me, I figured that out. A lot of people don't. A lot of people see a correction from a leader as, that leader, he's being bad. He just wants me to be his way. No. We're working in some sort of alignment is what it is. So I didn't take it personally. I didn't feel like, oh, this must not be the place for me. And you have to disassociate this identity with just.
Yeah. So that's really good, because I think I think that's there's a maturity issue there too with a lot of people, because especially the younger staff members who are in there who haven't had any ministry experience, they're coming right out of college or right out of the internship program, and they're hopping right in, and they just want to war against the culture, as opposed to, like, the quicker that you accept sometimes that this is how we do things here. It's not right or wrong. It's just the way it's done. And if you don't like it, you can leave.
You can move.
And that's, I did a post a little bit ago about, just the 18-month average tenure of a youth pastor, which is kind of been, I don't even know where they get that stat.
Yeah.
And everybody talks about that. But like most of these, made up stats. But most of the AI says it's true. So that's all that really matters.
Oh, well, then it is. Yeah, there you go.
But like, these people leave because they get mad at their lead pastor. And it's like, no, you have to learn to accept and understand why things are happening like that, and be okay with you don't like it, but you got to get in line too. And so you said with a good memory, tell our viewers about my day in Swebb history. All right. And this is, some people have called it like a redemptive calendar as well. But I've started to do what you've done. So tell our viewers what my day in Swebb history is.
Wait a second. Ask me that question again. What do you mean my day in Swebb history?
You talk about your calendar, where you take what happened in your life and you put it on your calendar as repeating, so you remember what my day is.
Oh, my calendar. Yes. I'm sorry.
I'm sure that helps.
Calendar. Yes, it absolutely does. Thank you. Sorry. So the calendar is just a Gmail calendar. So the additional calendar on Gmail, just like my birthdays or your football team, whatever. So I made up a new calendar on there called This Day in Swebb History. Sorry, so that was throwing me off. So This Day in Swebb History. That's okay. It's just, because it's on This Day in History is a I think it's even a hashtag out there. And so for me, I put This Day in Swebb History, and for me, again, it's just major moments. They're not only, hey, I got married this day, or our first child was born this day. Those are fine, but those, frankly, you should just automatically remember those. But some of the maybe not so big, like as in weddings and birth, is when somebody mails you a $200 check that you didn't even expect, but you needed at the right moment. That's a Matthew 6:33 moment. I have a tattoo right here on my left arm that's my paraphrase version of Matthew 6:33. It's a big verse, life verse for me. Got it from my grandfather. And I have probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 dozen examples on the calendar of that. But anyway, so it's just, I try to just mark moments. And if you want to be old school Bible guy, these are Ebenezer's, these are those kind of things. We're like, hey, thus far the Lord has, essentially worked on our behalf. And let's just mark this moment with a stone before we cross the river or whatever. Again, it's the Old Testament, New Testament. And that's all it is. It just helps me. And then they always show up. The more of those you stack up, then you wake up one day, 2 years later, it's on the calendar. You're like, oh man, okay, I was about to have a really bad day, or I was frustrated, or it's not even negative. Maybe it's just, you're just aimless that day. Maybe you're just like, I don't know what I'm gonna do today. I'm just kind of like, maybe we go to the pool. And then you see one of those things. You're like, oh, you know what? I need to go work towards another one of these, where this person was changed by my Instagram post, which again is crazy to think about. But people will tell me that stuff. It's nuts. They won't say, hey, that was a good post. They'll say, I literally quit my job, or I literally went to plant a church because of this Instagram post, which again, I think that's nuts. I know it's possible. I just personally, like, literally from a humble place, I'm like, I mean, I don't even know why you do that. But I mark that down on my calendar, and then it fuels me to, like, you know what? Okay, next time I find a 25-year-old, I'm going to say that. I'm going to say that. So,
man, that's good. That's so good. John Tyson, a pastor, he talks about a redemptive calendar, where he just is always remembering how the Lord's been faithful to him to spur him on to those next big steps. And, I feel like you got to be a little bit nostalgic as a leader. You can be too nostalgic. You got to remember those Ebenezer's.
Maybe stuck, but you're right. Yep.
Yeah. So, okay. So like I said, a lot of our people are planters / youth pastors / wannabe planters one day.
I've been all those. I love it.
Yeah. So what I want to know, because on the student ministry part for a second, were you ever a student pastor? Or were you just kind of into adult ministry, into that, kind of multi-site management? Tell us your background on that.
Yeah. So my dad, real quick, big story is my parents are in ministry, or were, I guess, vocationally. Now they've retired from ministry and they do other things to build the kingdom. But anyway, but yeah, I grew up in that world. Southern Baptist in the Dallas area of Texas, which is Mecca. It's the center of the universe from church world standpoint.
Yeah.
And so I just grew up around that sort of stuff. And, but I was the last in my family to say, yeah, sure, I'll be called into ministry, because I didn't go to youth camp on a Thursday night and all of a sudden God, during the shouts of the Lord reprised, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden God called to me and say that. It wasn't that. So I just was like, all right. So I went and did other things. My dad calls one day while I'm at this school in Phoenix, and he said, hey, why don't you just, come back and be my youth pastor, is pretty much what he said. And that's what I did. And this was at 22 years old or so. So I didn't ever want to be in
Hmm.
ministry in the traditional sense, in the vocational job sense, because I actually wanted to have a life. I wanted to do fun things. I didn't want to be in politics, and that's what church is. I know that there are
Yeah.
politics exist anytime there are two humans in a room. I get it, but I still just didn't want to do any of that. But I came back in, and what I was good at was mobilizing people.
Hmm.
And so my first proof of that was just, hey man, come manage these 14 students. But we grew to 70 within literally a few weeks, mainly because I could mobilize people, not because I preached good. We didn't do any kind of junk. So that
Hmm.
was my first step into ministry, which I feel like is a common thing. So you got to be a youth intern, and then you got to be like a custodian at some point, and then you get to be a co-youth leader, and then you get to be a youth pastor, and then you take your stair step up to the campus pastor, then you go to senior pastor. And all that. I kind of did some version of that progression, but jumping way ahead. Multi-site expansion. That's something that is more of a skill. I think it's a skill you learn. I don't buy that that's a burning bush calling thing.
Yeah.
But those all came later. But it started, and that ultimately became the case because I just knew what it was like to work with human beings across multiple denominations and demographics. I could talk to the parents and the students, which most youth pastors can't, and I think that's why they suck at it. They see themselves as entertainers to an 18-year-old or a 14-year-old. They don't see themselves as a partner with a 40-year-old. And I think that's an epic fail, which is why they're going to fail at church planning. So, but
Yeah.
somehow that was intuitive to me, and maybe that's because I grew
Yeah.
up with parents that did that sort of stuff. I don't know, but
Yeah.
but yes, I've been all of those things. I was a youth pastor. I actually enjoyed the hobby of it. And let me also put this little caveat in here, though. I didn't
Yeah.
get married till almost 28. You get married at
Okay.
21, 22, and then you want to go ahead and crank out a kid at 22. Good for you. But I can understand why those guys have this ridiculous excuse called work-life balance, which is a myth in any industry, anywhere in life.
Come on.
I can see that. But for me, I put it down. It's like, hey, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to do it. I didn't put off marriage because of that. I'm just saying that's not how my life aligned. I didn't get married till almost 28. And and it's fine. It's great. But I'm just saying that is a caveat because I know that there's a dude out there who went to a Christian university, which means you got to get married early, which means you got to have kids soon because they got to be missionaries in 20 minutes. And so, but I didn't follow that plan. So that did actually honestly help me, to be honest with you. So
That's yeah. That whole work-life balance crew of individuals is always just gets me. I read
I hate
early
it.
on in ministry Frank Beeler's Myth of Balance and said, forget
Yep.
that whole thing.
Yep.
uh,
Yep.
and so
Yep.
that's really good because as we're thinking about, so let's just talk youth ministry culture, okay? Because
Yeah,
I
dude.
think
Yeah.
that is, it used to be like people wanted to, be a youth pastor and then go be, a senior pastor one day and all that. And I feel like that's kind of
Yeah.
draining. It's all the youth pastor to church planner path.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and then I think there are many people who don't really even care about youth ministry. They just want to do church planning. I think
Nope.
it's a whole nother topic.
Right.
But
Yep.
you work with some of the highest level campus pastors. You've trained some of the best people out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are the things that student pastors are doing that are useless for campus pastor or multi-site ministry that they're like making their bread and butter, but it don't work?
Yeah. Okay, let me reword your question. Are you asking
Okay.
me what does a youth pastor do now that if he wants to be something else one day, he's completely wasting his time on?
That's what I'm
Okay.
asking.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. I think being an event planner. I hate
Hmm.
that. And that's why I see a lot of church planners. They're like, dude, we have this cool vision night. And they'll spend thousands of dollars and dozens of hours planning a quote vision night or an interest meeting, both of which I never once used in the traditional sense at elevation starting campuses, nor would I've ever coached a church planner on, nor when I was a church planner, I want to do that, nor did my dad when he was a church planner do that. So I think pre-gathering, if you will, before a launch day, using that phrase in quotes as well, fine. My point is we love ourselves some events because it gives us the illusion that we are in control of the outcome. And
Hmm.
that is the opposite of faith. It is the opposite of moving people in ministry. Moses was told by God verbally in a burning bush what was going to happen, and it still didn't pan out the same way because he didn't go in the promised land. But you plan a freaking vision night because you have expertise in planning youth worship nights for 17 students. No wonder you suck as a campus pastor, because you thought your whole life was planning an event that leads to a predictable outcome, which is always too small-minded, by the way. And then you just repeat the cycle because it gives you illusion of control. You get to use the money, you get to use the time, you got to plan the theme before you even got a word from the Lord about what you're going to preach about, but you plan the theme. And God's like, oh, that's cool. Let me give you some wisdom. Let me give you an illustration that fits into what you planned the theme to be. That's 99% of youth events right there. So because you plan yourself out and build yourself out as an event planner, that's why so many church planters and lead pastors, church planner is only a season of less than 12 months, by the way. You don't get to call yourself a church planner after a year. Stop saying that. But anyway, so once you do that, then that's why they do so many events. That's why they cap out at 200, 300, 400 people and cap out. Why? Because now, you can't do events for 1,000 people in the same traditional way. And that freaks them out. And so you see how that's useless? I think gathering people's fine. And I think cooking hot dogs for July 4th is fine. But there's a different mindset in there that says, I'm going to plan an event because you just got to, quote, gather people. And that's all sideways. It's all pointless. It's not necessary. And people will do fine to gather on their own. That's why they did it before you showed up. So you don't have it locked down. Churches don't have the market cornered on, quote, community or, quote, biblical community, whatever the frick that even means. They don't have it locked down, but we think we do because it gives us meaning and value to be in control of the total picture. And again, that's the opposite of what I find the story of Jesus to be.
And I think there's a kind of a little known or a little talked about secret in like youth ministry world. And this is anecdotal, but is oftentimes the churches that I've ran across who have some of the largest budgets that throw the largest events have some of the smallest youth ministries for large churches.
Yeah.
And that's always blown my mind how you can do an event, for your big, whatever you guys call it. And there's 2,000 kids there. And then I show up on a Sunday morning to see your regular gathering and there's 120 kids in the room. And I'm like, why does this not make sense? When I know the Baptist church down the road, First Baptist so-and-so's got 500 kids over there. And it's just, that's always blown my mind. Just how some of these huge churches.
That's not super anecdotal, meaning there are a lot of those examples. Elevation's one of those examples. Now, here's why. Here's the language I try to coach people and help people think differently on. I'm a big fan of youth in ministry. Everybody else wants to create a youth ministry. They want a branded capital Y, capital M, or they, of course, no vowels. I don't know why youth can't use vowels. So it's like YTH. And everybody uses the same thing. And we got to have a cool name. Like my youth ministry is called Power Source. You got to have some sort of name for it. That now you've created a controllable thing. You're like, hey, I can control it. I speak the language. I make everything happen because we are Power Source. We are the youth. We believe in the next generation. All the same cliches. There's the same 5 cliches for every youth ministry out there. That sucks, by the way. Then there are churches who put youth in ministry. That's the 14-year-old playing drums on the main stage, not because we're trying to give them a shot, but because they're actually good at it. That's where they don't pay every person in the production studio. Those are all volunteers because they're youth in ministry. And you see that all the time. That's the Elevation story. We used to have a lot of youth in ministry. Then we started a youth ministry. And that's why you see the events. And that's just as common everywhere. I'm not trying to throw shade at Elevation. That's just a common thing. And I'm just saying nobody's immune to it because it gets to this point where like, hey, I want to control, I want to do this thing. And I get it. It's the draw, especially when a mom comes to you and she probably tithes $20,000 to $30,000 a year. And she's like, what are you going to do for my students? All of a sudden we think, because my answer is, I don't know. You're the parent. I'll let you know when I have a Bible study going on. But the initial response is, oh, crap. Janet wants herself a babysitter's club. I guess I got to start an event. And because she's a big tither, of course, now Bob and Joe at the top level of the organization at traditional church or whatever, they want you to do it. But that's what it is. They want a youth ministry, which is an event, which is a brand, which is a controllable entity. They don't want to put youth in ministry because that requires you almost by definition to take your hands off of it, trust your own leadership, and trust God to move them somewhere, which is exactly what Jesus did. And but again, it's a lot harder to do.
Do you think that churches need a youth ministry to reach the next generation?
No, I think that's why they're not reaching the next generation, because they've created a club that says, hey, we're going to take you out of church. We're going to come start a separate church, a church plant. We're going to call it, again, Power Source, pick your youth ministry, no vowel sounds, youth, whatever you want to call it. and we're going to do these separate events over here with separate pastor, separate band, right? Separate night of the week, right? So, well, those are three main ingredients for a separate church plant. Okay. We like the old people's money, so we get to be paid for by the regular church, but we started a completely separate church plant. By definition, I'd love for somebody to come at me and argue me on this. And that we've created a completely separate entity. And then at 18 or whatever time they decide to leave church, they're supposed to automatically just go right back into big church. They don't know what that is. They've never seen it. By this point, that pastor who was relevant in his 40s is now in his 50s and not as relevant anymore because he doesn't know what it's like to talk to humans. He knows what it's like to talk to old parents with preferences. But the humans in a purer form that haven't been indoctrinated quite as much yet are the youth, aka the next generation. But we don't talk to the next generation. We isolate the next generation, then we stick them back into the old people, so to speak, and then the cycle continues, which is why all the people that talk about because we love stats, right? So I'm sure George Barna to Kerry to Frank. I mean, Frank's brilliant. Maybe he's got a stat for this. Everybody has a stat that talks about the youth leaving the church. And I'm over here like, well, I thought youth ministry still solved that. I thought at the last conference last year, you solved that. You put 9,000 people in a Birmingham arena, and I thought we were supposed to solve that, but we have the same problems because we love the idea of isolating the youth and then being shocked when they don't know how to reintegrate into regular church life. It's hilarious.
I mean, why would you not deconstruct when you just deconstructed their whole church per graduation? Like you've taken away their church, now, and they don't have a community. I think that's so on point, man. And I think a lot of the problems that we, are always decrying and sharing on social media, all the little infographics and carousels. It's like, our youth culture created this in a lot of ways.
100%. 100%. Now, listen, I want to say though, if you are a youth pastor in traditional sense, the name, whatever you call, I think you have value to mobilize students. So I'm a big fan of the demographic. My daughter's going to be 12 next Wednesday. She is already going to be in 7th grade.
Wow.
And at our church where we were attending, she was a volunteer because we didn't have a youth ministry in traditional sense. You sat with dad in church or whoever you want to sit with in church. And so she would sit next to me and then she would serve in the baby room. And she was one of the best volunteers because she wanted to be there. Karen, generic kids lady, didn't just go, oh my gosh, we need help. She's like, hey, I want to do something that matters because I'm in 6th grade. I'm just now learning what it's like to be out in real life. Like, that's a game changer. So I'm a fan of having a person, quote, pastor that generation, pastor that demographic. Huge fan of that. What I'm not a fan of is that person thinking what that means is an event planner on a Wednesday night with everything else completely manufactured on its own in isolation. And that's what it is. And it's backwards.
Yeah. And, you said you come from an SBC background, and I've served in SBC church my entire ministry. One of the things that most of kind of the SBC churches that have kind of made the jump to trying to, I guess, modernize a little bit, they still have all of their, they have their midweek service, but most of them still have to do something on Sunday mornings for the students. Right. And every SBC youth pastor I've talked to hates it, but can't get away from it because they're like they can't do anything about it. It's like, this is the way we do it. Yeah. Nobody wants to go to listen to the choir on Sundays. So we got to do something for them. And those kids don't even like being there. It's just better than big church. And it's like, what if we said, forget that? What if we said, we're not going to do that, and we're going to get every one of those kids in ministry serving, which is what the church that I've been a part of in my ministry does. And I mean, it builds the church in such a special way that it's so much better than just, hey, let's make a kids table.
Yeah, I agree. Well, again, that's the cycle though. Remember, this youth pastor is going to, quote, graduate, and he's going to become the next senior pastor because that's his whole goal in life for a majority of the people we're talking about. Now, they may not constantly think it now, but that's what they want to do because they're like, I can do it better. Because at some point they get disgruntled. And instead of speaking up and saying something and owning their own pair and be talking about it, they have to just be like, never mind, I'm going to deconstruct my idea of church, go start my own thing. So I get it. Everybody has that desire at some point. They do that. Then they go start the church. Problem is they wake up and they're 45 years old. And now at their church, they got to hire a youth pastor. And then the cycle continues. So the same old dude that's like, no, you have to bring the students on Wednesday and Monday and Sunday. Yeah, there's a reason for that. That's because that's what he did. And we can talk about doing it different all day, but it's the same cycle over and over. But real quick, you just said this. It's funny. It's just worth pointing out. It's funny. We actually make students, that demographic, go to church twice as much as everybody else. They have to come on Wednesdays and Sundays, right? they have to serve an event at the church when hey, as a church, we're going to all mobilize, but then they also have to go serve on Wednesday night, with their demographic there. It's fine. I just think it's really funny that we spend our whole life as an adult church trying to be like, hey, we want to make sure we let people do this. And we don't want to ask too much of our volunteers, but we definitely want all the students to come to church twice a week and then somehow be shocked when they don't like it. It's the funniest thing.
You throw in a small group on top of that, and you're 3 times a week.
Yeah, you got to do that too, of course. Yeah.
Small group too, so that's 4 times a week, and now you've created your own little your own little culture within a culture, and it's and then if you don't have parents, I mean, youth ministry context, if you don't have parents who are willing to drive you to do all those things, and that's the only way to follow that discipleship pathway, you've now basically told the kids whose parents aren't engaged, we don't really care about you. Go to hell, So
that's right.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay. So let's go to, all right. There is like this whole culture in youth culture that's like, we want to be the influencer student pastor. Okay. And they see the guys who are doing it well and probably doing it faithfully. Like they didn't like try to be influencers. They just kind of, said some great things and people, caught on. Sure. But now there's all these wannabes. And I am a former wannabe. I wanted to be the next Stephen Webb. I got the faux hawk when he got the faux hawk.
You do, bro. Yeah, there you go. Come on.
And so I was one of those guys who wanted to, who thought I was the best thing. And so talk about like, okay, so you're in your 40s, right? You're in your lower 40s.
44.
All right. So all right, you're sitting as a 40-year-old who talks to all these people. Okay. What are some behaviors and some things that you're seeing these young, influential guys doing that you just roll your eyes at in your seat now?
So, wow. And we have such a short podcast. I could talk for 3 days on that. What are these young wannabe influencers doing? Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I just feel like it seems small, but I think it's really big because it fuels their desire to go back and see how many likes they have on that post. They're trying to make things sticky. They want to preach like Robert Madu is what they want. They want everything to have a cadence and a $10,000 sermon prop. And so every post has to be like, it's not this, it's this. You've seen my post. It's been a while, but I think you've seen it where I tell people how to make a preachery line. You add this, you say this, and it comes out this way. I've actually made a formula to how to make a preachery line. And now some people are good at it. Like, frankly, I'll just be honest with you. I speak in alliteration naturally. It's just how my brain works. I have a little bit larger vocabulary maybe, or I think in terms of memorable and portable content. That's fine. But frankly, not everybody can do that. And so they try to. And so now they're making up alliterated lists that are completely left field because it's what they saw last time. So ultimately, I think it's like, man, how can I be trendy and sticky? How can I get quotable? I want my quote on a graphic. I want my quote to be written in some sort of graphic that everybody will reshare. And I think ultimately that's probably the main thing. I mean, of course, they're still doing events. They're still trying to be on Preachers and Sneakers and then preach against it, but they still want to be on it. They still want to be seen by all the same people in all the same green rooms. I've been there. I've been in all those green rooms, bro. It's hilarious. But it all comes back to like, man, but that one time Mike Todd said this, I think I can say that. Robert Madu said this, I think I can say that. Furtick said this, I can say that. And they just want to quote. And funny enough, bro, I've seen videos side by side, like you and I are standing on the computer right now, where they'll show Furtick preach one thing, and then this youth pastor preaches word for word the same, like word for word the same, like illustrations, not principles, not Bible verse. But like, and it's usually like a 25-year-old saying something a 40-year-old, because Furtick's in his 40s, but we like to think he's 22 still. And then they'll preach the same thing. I'm like, that illustration didn't make sense to you, but you were just copying verbatim because you like the cadence. You like the feel of how it rolls off the tongue. Problem is you didn't put the effort in. And I think they just want to be quotable. So,
dude, I wish I'd heard this when I was 21 years old doing that exact same thing.
Wait, can I be honest? Let me be vulnerable. When I grew up at that kind of age of coming into youth ministry or whatever, I didn't grow up in social media world, right? MySpace was a thing. Facebook was probably just now starting off when I was maybe a youth pastor. I don't remember when that was necessarily, but like all that. I was a church planner when Twitter was a deal, like 2007 or 8, that had just kicked off. So all that to say, there's a different push nowadays and inundated with tons of I want to be that I didn't have to come up with. So I agree and understand that puts me in a different scenario. But the vulnerable part, I'll say, is I wanted to be Erwin McManus, because that dude is just brilliant and he's insightful. He's not always trying to be quotable. I was drawn to the fact he made more friends outside of the church than inside the church. I love that he's a heretic. So I'm just saying, I understand what it's like to have somebody you look at, you're like, oh, I want to talk like that guy. Because at some point you have to, kind of borrow their confidence and borrow their content so you can learn your craft. I get that. And Pastor Stephen Furtick himself has even taught on something like that, where he's got people he's looked to. So I'm not saying it's not a common thing. At some point, though, you have to say, you know what, but this is me. And I've lived this. I'm not simply a radio man for somebody else's story. And that's the part that very few people can make that jump.
That's great, man. So, making a little bit of a turn here into the church planning world. So what I have found is that some people will say that starting a multi-site is the same as church planning. And they kind of use that. Like, we're going to plant a church in this community when it's really multi-site. What's the difference? And why are those two things, like, do they require a different type of person to do those things, to start a multi-site venue versus planning a church? And what are some of the nuances?
Dude, that's a good question. I'm a multi-site guy. That's my thing. I love that. So I think there's a lot of similarities, and of course there's a lot of differences. I will say at Elevation, so my job was to start all the distant campuses, Elevation, 11 of 20, all the ones outside of Charlotte, and essentially be a consultant for the ones inside of Charlotte. So I'd like to think I've seen a few things. So that being said, I actually ran my church, campuses. So when I was starting a campus in Virginia or Toronto or Florida or whatever, I actually ran those like church plant. So I actually trained my campus pastors as church planters. There's a different mindset. So I wanted them to think for themselves, not be a project manager. Most churches that have campus pastors, they have project managers. Now they're well paid and they're called campus pastors. They're nice guys. I know a lot of these guys at Life Church, Christ Fellowship, other massive multi-site. They're fine. But the mindset is still, hey, I need you to take what we do and just kind of make it work over there. That's a project manager is what that is. Okay. Really well-paid project manager. Now that they can still preach and they can still mobilize people and they can still pastor, or whatever that means. They can do all that. But I think there's a different mindset from the beginning to say, you know what, you're going to pioneer something that does not exist. And I wanted them to be church planners. So that's where I think I try to merge the two together. I don't think church planting is multi-site, but I do think multi-site can and should be more church planting. I think it only goes in one direction. You're starting something new. You have to make new friends. Let me give you the example on my favorite example on why I think this is true. Is I'm at Elevation. That church is a monster with the biggest church platform that there is in the world. When you take into consideration Stephen Furtick Ministries or Elevation Worship, so it's a monster, right? Everybody in the church world, you go, oh yeah, I've heard of that guy or that music, whatever. Okay, it's a monster. So then there's the naysayers, other denominations, small churches, people who live in Alabama, whatever. They're like, oh, well, Furtick, blah, blah, blah. Of course it's easy to start a church over there when you have that big church. Of course it's easy to start a campus when you have the face of Furtick or something. And that's the quick assumption. They'll say this about Rick Warren in the 80s. They say this about everybody, right? At some point, we're trying to excuse somebody else's success because we can't do it. Okay, that's fine. The funny thing about that is that assumes that my target audience is people who know Furtick. Well, that's not our target audience. Our target audience is lost people that are atheists, pagans, agnostics, frustrated people that don't even know their gender, like people that got pissed at the last church 6 years ago and they haven't been back. Like that's who our target audience is. And so I don't care how big your church is, how much money you have. You can't just put up the orange banner with the Elevation logo and a Stephen Furtick quote and everybody flock to it if that's not your target audience. And so I had to start with a church planter mindset because I'm trying to reach a church planter audience, aka a new audience of people that don't go to church. I'm not looking for fans. And that right there is a big epic difference between youth pastor and everybody else. Is they're trying to make the next Elevation, Life Church, whatever. Right. They're trying to get the same people. That's why everybody loves starting a church in Austin and Nashville and all those places. It's like it's trendy where everybody already speaks your language. This is why you always cap out, because you borrowed everybody from the last church plant in Franklin. And they just came up to Nashville this time. Happens all the time. That's the influencer culture. That's the influencer culture, not the builder culture, not the pioneer culture. That's the I say things that the last guy said, but I say them with different shoes on. Therefore, you're going to want to come here for 6 months until you get mad and go the next day. So you have to do that if you're going to reach a new audience.
So here's the pushback I've heard before on that, and I want you to respond to it. Somebody they'll say, well, you don't need a pioneer. You don't need an apostle type person in a multi-site venue. You need someone to run the play. because, and here's what I've heard, is because if
Yeah.
you get somebody who wants to preach, who has all that, charge the hill drive, who, is kind of that makeup, eventually they're just going to leave and start their own thing. And so we need somebody
for sure.
to run the play, respond to that.
Dude, maybe. I hate the phrase run the play, because even that logic doesn't work in football. You get to run the play once. The playbook that exists in football is custom made each game. It's a game plan.
Mm-hmm.
So even the run the play metaphor burns out after the first time you use that language. It's just the stupidest thing. I hate it so much. So there's that. The pioneering, if you have one of these, they're automatically going to leave. I mean, maybe it's not true for the apostles, the real literal apostles, the ones we read in the Bible about. Paul, it's not true for them, but apparently it's automatically going to be the case here. Or, hang on a second, or the issue is you suck as a leader, you're insecure, and you can't possibly fathom having these hustlers underneath you, and they're going to lap you. You're going to get mad, angry, try to hold them down and push them out. They're going to leave is a result of you're going to push them out. About 99% of the time, man, the amount of stories I could tell with the names I could drop right now with that example across some of your biggest churches. To me, that's what it is. Now, here's the deal. Let's just go back to the Bible. I'm just kind of paraphrasing here the story, but at the end of the day, Jesus did work in 3 years with barely saved Christians. When he ascended into heaven, the disciples were still literally casting lots to figure out who was going to be the replacement. They're looking in the sky like, what the heck are we going to do now? They had seen miracles and miracles and miracles, magic tricks on magic tricks. They had seen demons go into pigs and fall off a cliff. They'd seen crazy stuff. And they still were like, what are we going to do? Meaning they were rookies. They weren't approved, and they would not make your greeter team, everybody watching this video right now, because they didn't check all the boxes. They didn't go through growth track. They didn't do all the stuff. But Jesus, in his confidence in his ability and his awareness that some things require patience, you got to let it marinate. People have to take what you said. You have to leave the equation, right? Because that's a variable. Of course, your kids are going to be well behaved when the dad's in town. What happens when the dad leaves? That's why there's a cliche about when the cat's gone. The cat and the mouse thing. Like, there's a reason for that. So yeah, so Jesus was like, it's fine. I gave them plenty. I got to leave to see what they're going to do, and it worked. But that's because Jesus was a gangster. He walked with swagger and confidence. He knew who he was. He was confident in not just what he had said and where he came from, but what he did while he was with who he was with. And then he left. So that's why I'm wholeheartedly against the whole, like, man, I'm going to die in the pulpit. I'm going to be 117 years old. I'm going to preach this church down, to 60, 70 years from now. Like, that's why your church plateaus, because nothing can outgrow you. And so seen it all. And you're seeing it right now. Some of the big game-changing churches that we loved 10 years ago are crap now, or plateaued now, or declining now. Why? Because the one thing that hasn't changed is the senior leader who cannot be outgrown or lapped. I'm not saying it's universal. I think there are people that can see themselves as the lead preacher, but still let other people surpass them when it comes to ideas, leadership, influence, whatever. That's a unique leader, though. And those are the ones that are most like Jesus. To me, that's the issue. So yes, you're right. Yeah. People will eventually leave, but it's because you push them out as an insecure leader.
Yeah. I'm just seeing so much, like, even like with teaching teams, like people sharing the load so much more. That is, the next generation is listening to that more than, the guy who preached 80-90% of the year and then flew in their best friends to do the other ones, that were the top 1% communicators. Right. With multi-site, and this will be the last question before we kind of hit some really quick ones to close us up here. So do you think that live streaming preaching is going to break through the noise for the next generation when it comes to multi-site venues?
Man, I don't think it's a problem. I just don't buy that. I think that's something that the church excuses. So the rest of the world is figuring out how to stream more, right? Mm-hmm. And you pay for multiple streams at your house. Well, that's different. That's entertainment, dude. That's why half you go to church anyway is entertainment. You're just trying to scratch the itch. It's like, I wonder what Joe Champion's preaching today. I wonder what Chris said this week. I wonder what Frederick said this week. It's the same. Don't lie to me. So that's the problem. So I don't think streaming or two-dimensional communication is the problem. We read a 2,000-year-old Bible on pieces of paper, and somehow that's still living and active. So I don't think the medium is the problem. I think we like to excuse it because at some point we suck at it. We hit our own plateau. We don't know what to talk about anymore. You know why? Because, again, we've been doing it for 20 or 30 years. You ran out of illustrations. Your kids have graduated and left. You're no longer saying good illustrations to the guy that has a 4-year-old. So it doesn't mean you completely are irrelevant with preaching the gospel. I'm not saying that. And you can be 60 years old and preach phenomenal. That's fine. I'm just saying that we're excusing our inability to work or flex or put in effort, or the fact that maybe we really just have outgrown our usefulness in that role or in that position or at that skill, whatever that is. And then we say, oh, you know what it is? Screen fatigue. Oh, man, you know what it is? People they want to know their pastor. Well, dude, pastor and preacher are different things. We got to please, for the love of God, open a dictionary and see that those are different things. You can have a preacher on a screen, which is why everybody's fine to watch YouTube. And the same people that complain about, I want to see my pastor in real life, watch Mike Todd every week. They don't live in Tulsa, but that's exactly what they do. Youth pastors just copy everything Mike Todd says, but then at their own church, be like, nah, I wish our pastor was on screen. Like, dude, you're a moron. That's all that is. There's no other word for that. It's just like, you're an idiot. So, and that's the problem. So it's not the medium, dude. It's the mindset that pastor and preacher are different things. Go love and care for people. And if we just need content for inspiration and motivation that the Holy Spirit can still work through. I'm not saying that the Holy Spirit's not involved in that. Well, that's fine. Which is why the Bible is living and active, which is why your mom can still call you on FaceTime and put you in your place in your 30s or 40s. She's doing that on the screen. So it can still happen. It can still happen. And I think it's an excuse. I think it's an epic excuse because we've lost the skill and the calling and the discipline to connect with humans when we are with humans. And then we blame it on the screen when we're just trying to inform humans backwards.
Do you think it's like more of an excuse of like just being a bad communicator? Like you're not thinking about the screen. You're not thinking about the audience. You're not being a better communicator. You're just preaching like you're preaching to your live crowd. You think that's
I do think there's a skill between the two. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I've always thought it was like, multi-site preaching works great for like really good communicators, but a lot of people who are getting by and are not very good communicators in the church, aren't going to work at all on the screen. They can get by because of the relationship.
Yeah, that's fine. So the relationship's a big deal. That's part of that. There's skill in the actual language coming out of your mouth. Can you communicate to use your language communicator? I think that's probably true. And there's a craft to that. And then there's how you do sermon formation. That's a different story. Then does the Holy Spirit even know who you are? I wish that's a conversation we'd have at some point with somebody. Sometimes it's like you are employed at a Christian organization, but God hasn't met you in a long time, bro. Mm-hmm. So I think there's all that part of it. But here's the one that nobody's thinking about is your tech team sucks and your camera sucks. And we can't follow you and you're walking over the stage and your lighting is terrible, but we're like, no, but God can still work. Right. And that's why you suck, because you have 8-year-olds running a camera that you pulled out of your closet to follow you around on the stage that you don't want to pay for because you're using 65% of your budget on staffing. Because you're an idiot. So just don't do online. It's okay. Just don't do streaming. Just don't do multi-site. Just start church planting and then send them out correctly. So that's why multi-site is very difficult. Because to scale, you have to simplify and actually accentuate what you do spend money and effort on the few things. Most people do the opposite. They want to spend a ton of money on 1,000 things or divide it among 1,000 things. And that's why it's mediocre. So my point is there might be a lot better communicators out there than our technology or our teams will enable us to see. And that's also a big part of the equation. So, yeah.
That's great. So, all right. So here's some quick hitters before we wrap up here. Okay. Yeah. And so everybody comes to Swebb's channel for the spice, right? Everybody loves the spice around.
It is Friday. All right.
It is. Yeah. And so what I want to do is I want to just go silly or strategic. All right. Are these strategic things we're doing, or are they stupid and silly and should be thrown out? And then give just kind of like a statement or two after about what you think, and then we'll kind of move on through them.
Pretty quick.
So, and a lot of these are coming from the content that you've already put out because I feel like people need to hear it again. Okay. Let's do this. Starting a church plant with one service because we don't have enough people. Silly or strategic?
Yeah. Absolutely silly. I'll say stupid. I feel like you're missing the boat, and it's going to be your Achilles that actually leads you to not ever progress past it. Yeah. Silly.
There you go. The phrase youth ministry should not be a stepping stone to the next thing. Silly or strategic?
The phrase is great. No, the phrase is great. It's strategic. You definitely need to think of it as like, I'm here for life because I'm working this. I'm not working it until. So yeah, that's strategic if you can live by that. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Paying volunteers.
Wait, isn't that an oxymoron? I think that's silly. So for example, the example that I don't know, I mean, where I've ranted it before is that churches pay kids workers to come babysit kids on Sunday morning, meaning they call a company in town that says, hey, we're looking for babysitters, and they'll pay because we don't have volunteers. Like, hey, that's why your church is going to continue to decline. So that's the kind of stuff I think is silly. So,
let's go. And having a worship pastor, silly or strategic, especially like in comparison to like
so huge.
I know, but like you've been talking a lot about changing the song leader.
Yeah.
That term.
Yeah.
Should we be hiring musicians, or should we be hiring song leaders, or should we be hiring like people to lead that department who are musicians?
Right. Let me just zoom out a little bit and say, I think worship pastor as a responsibility, not a role title, is strategic. I think hiring a guy who plays and just giving him the title, yes, that's silly. But worship pastor, and frankly, that's a responsibility. In most churches, they can't afford both. We're not talking 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 member churches. The lead pastor might need to carry the role of a worship pastor, meaning let me lead you in a way that when you come out on Sunday, we're seeing the overflow of what the Holy Spirit did through you during the week. And it takes a pastor to move people that way rather than just a guy with musical talent. So again, strategic if you can carry the responsibility of a worship pastor. Silly if you just hire the role of a worship pastor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's go. We have an online campus. Silly or strategic?
No, you don't. It's a lie, just like your prison campuses. It's silly. Mm-hmm. There's 3 churches on the planet that have an online campus, and even then, it's still just online viewers with more stuff to do. So no, you don't.
Yeah. Let's go. We are okay. Pastors who have podcasts. Do you feel like that's something that we should be spending our time on?
Well, that's pretty broad. Some people, yes. I think generally it's probably pretty silly because most that I've seen, I'm not saying it's true for everybody, most I've seen it's because they just want to talk into an echo chamber and they don't know what else to do. It's a place for them to practice some content. And so they don't talk to their staff. They're not in the staff office. They just outsource that to their wife or to another executive pastor leader or whatever. And they go start a podcast. I'm like, man, if that's your good content, I'm hoping your staff heard it first. You should always deliver your best content top down, not bottom up. Pastor Stephen Webb did this very well. I think Craig Rochelle does this very well. So there's a lot of leaders that do this very well, which actually led to their like their stratospheric, like massive meteoric rise or whatever, because they led top down from good content. They didn't try to hold it so that it get a lot of clicks. So I think most people probably do it from a silly standpoint, but if you've got a lot of content and it's natural for you and it's not taking you away from doing your actual job, and that's where we just have to lose a lot of people right there because it is taken away from doing an actual job, then maybe it's strategic for them. Let me give you an example real quick. Local pastor here, Eric Morris, Victory City Church in Austin, Pflugerville, technically. He does a sort of podcasty thing, but he started it. I thought this was a brilliant idea he came up with a couple years ago when I was with him over there. He did it solely to be internal. He's like, I want to take thoughts and processes in the podcast format and promote it to my church so that they hear more of us processing. That is very strategic. Now, if it also comes out on Instagram, that's a bonus. But he didn't start it to get a lot of clicks, and he still does that. And I think it's really, really good content. It's just very simple, practical, but he's speaking to a very niche audience, his audience. Now that'd be very strategic.
I heard somebody say it's got to work with a local audience before it needs to work with a global audience. You got to get it there. So church planting, we're starting in an area where there is already churches. Should it be done? Can it be done? Is it silly to do that? Should we go to the place, the major metropolitan area, the church planting yards, or can you do it?
Bro, church planting graveyard. Are you trying to trigger me? Dude, go where God called you to start a church, freaking go start a church.
Yeah. Period.
I don't care if that means you have to give back the $50,000 because they want to prove you to be within 20 miles of the next arc planner. Bro, did God call you to start a church there? Go start a church there. And that's it. But here's the other thing beyond that, little level right past that is, man, you got to do life in a place that your family can live life. You can't go like, hey, we're going to live here where we can afford it and we enjoy it and it's our demographic. But, they only approved us to do it 20 miles across the street where the average, house is, 1.7 million. Okay, well, good luck, bro. You're not even going to be in the same town you do life in. So where did God call you to start a church? What do you want? Like, just start selfishly. Where do you want to start a church? Then go do that. But if you give up that because somebody else says they will or won't pay for it, that's called prostitution. It is. You're like, hey, this is my preference. And it's all about, I want to pay money so I can have some sort of gratified feeling with the lack of responsibility. Well, they have a name for that on late night Fridays and Saturdays in urban areas. So again, call me on it if you want, but ultimately go where you're supposed to go and make it work.
That's great, man. Well, man, that's a good place to end this, man. This wanted to throw some broad strokes there at you at the end just to see what I could get out of you here. So helpful, and I think that again, just please keep pumping that content out for us all, because we're sharing it with our lead teams. We're sharing it. We're talking about it in cubicles and pods, and I mean, it really is making a difference, man. And I just want to commend anybody. You keep sharing this with your lead pastors and keep sharing it with your team, because, I think if churches were coached to think differently, we would have a different state of the church as well.
That's right.
And so, man, Swebb, thank you so much for coming on today and taking time out of your schedule.
Man,
and
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And don't forget, for those of you who are watching, follow along, be sure and like and subscribe. And we're going to keep trying to bring some great conversations to you guys. So thank you so much for joining us today.